Hi, everyone. My name is Carl Russick. I'm the Director of Programs and Applied Research at the Water Center at the University of Pennsylvania. Thanks very much for being part of the process that we're helping undertake in the Three Rivers region. And thanks very much for listening to my presentation. Apologize not able to give it in person, given the circumstances, but look forward to meeting you all as soon as possible. Not used to doing this online, used to doing it in front of people. So again, apologies if it comes across a little clunky. Very interested in feedback and making this part of the larger dialogue with you all. The question comes to mind, what is the University of Pennsylvania doing involved in the Three Rivers region? And the answer is that the Heinz Endowments decided that it would be appropriate for someone to take an outside view. You might say there's been a lot of water under the bridge with respect to these issues in the western part of the state. And it would be helpful in the mind of the Heinz Endowments for someone to come in and kind of take an inventory. There's a two-phase process that we've undertaken. Phase one's been completed and the report from phase one is on the website. It's basically an initial assessment of the state of the waters in the Pittsburgh region. And I say that carefully because we're dealing with watersheds, not political boundaries. It was also a chance to identify the priorities of drivers of the people in the region, the lead stakeholders, and also establish some sort of an inventory of the threats, opportunities, challenges, and weaknesses facing water issues, quality, quantity, access, etc., in the region. Phase two is currently underway, where we are working to help create a roadmap, a big picture for a collaborative multi-stakeholder process to improve issues of quality, quantity, and access to water resources for all constituents of Pittsburgh's Three Rivers and the larger watersheds that they comprise. And as I said, this is funded by the Heinz Endowments, so a thank you to them as well. The big question that we're looking to answer for the region and for the nation as a whole, how do we adapt water policy, water systems, and water practices such that we protect public health and the environment, obviously, but while encouraging innovation, growth, resilience, sustainability, equity, and justice? A big question, not going to answer it in a 20-minute PowerPoint, and not going to answer it completely in the process we're undertaking for the region, but something to keep in mind as we go through this work together. And there are a lot of challenges to be overcome. Obviously, in the Pittsburgh region itself, close in, if you will, you've got deferred capital investment of $2 to $6 billion between Pittsburgh Water and Sewer Authority and the Alcosan Stormwater Management, CSO Tunnel Project, among other projects. That's going to suck a lot of attention and a lot of capital out of the room, if you will. It's going to use up a lot of the oxygen. And the question is, how do we make sure that the other important priorities across the region get the attention they deserve? Because clearly this is not just about PwC and Alcosan. It's about a much larger region and a much more complex and important system than that. The region, as you all know, has a rich legacy of strong local governance. There are a lot of political boundaries and cooperation among political entities in the region is not always strong. There is not a unity among the political leadership. The fault lines ideologically across party and across the region can be difficult to overcome. There's also not an organized central entity or organized central plan for water resources in the region, which, that comes with positives and negatives, obviously, but people need an overriding goal to be working towards. And that's something we'll talk about as part of this network. The water systems themselves in the region are very fragmented and siloed, whether it be individual watersheds, utilities, government entities, management of quantity versus management of quality, et cetera. There needs to be much more joined up thinking. There's also obviously a lack of enough data. There's never enough data across a watershed, but in order to make good informed decisions, they need to be based on sound science as opposed to opinion or flawed ideas. So better data collection, better data sharing is going to be very important. There's also weak regulatory and policy oversight. And there are conflicts between economic, social, and environmental goals. This is all feedback we received in the first phase of the process. This is not the Water Center at Penn's opinions. This is what we heard from you all as stakeholders in the region. Among these, many, many others, as you can see here. We tried to collect as many water resource needs as people told us. I'm sure we missed some. Feel free to pause the presentation and read through these if you'd like, but it gives you a feel for, beyond the things that are going to cost the most money, there, such as PWSA and Alcosan, there are significant issues that need to be addressed and that people need to keep in mind. Because one of the things we're going to talk about is how we better leverage efforts so that you can, tick off multiple boxes as you're dealing with these issues and do more with less. Because as we're all aware, in the coming months and years, we're going to be in a very resource constrained environment. These issues are not going to go away. We'll need to work smarter in order to take advantage of the resources we can muster. How do we do that? By creating a common vision. Our waterways and water systems remain extremely vulnerable. There's old infrastructure, there is legacy contamination, and new challenges. Obviously, protecting and enhancing water resources is critical for public health, for the environment, and for economic vitality in the region. As I mentioned, these issues extend well beyond Alcosan and PWSA. These are region-wide issues, and people across the region, from the headwaters to the point and downstream along the Ohio, need to be involved actively in working together. And it's going to take some boldness, and it's going to take some action orientation in order to achieve the original Clean Water Act goals of swimmable, fishable, drinkable. And we've added accessible, attractive, just, and safe water. By what timeline? 2050, 2070, 2100? What's realistic? It needs to be realistic. These things take time, but at the same time, you need something out there that you can work towards. All of this is framed in a backdrop that, as you'll know, based on the flooding in the region over the last several years, the traditional hydrologic models of the hydrologic regime don't necessarily hold up in the new normal, if you will. We're not quite sure what the new normal is. There is anyone who's familiar with the idea of 100-year floods, 250-year floods, realizes that some of those probabilities seem to be changing, and that weather seems to be much more erratic. That's going to have effects not only on water quantity, but water quality as well. Again, necessitating working smarter across these boundaries and across political silos as well. For Hines, that phase 2 that I mentioned really has 4 elements. The first is the activity we're engaged in now, the creation of a Three Rivers Watershed Action Network. Remember that word network. This is not an organization. This is not yet another bureaucratic entity. This is meant to connect existing organizations and existing people across the region. Second is an outgrowth of that, development of a Three Rivers Watershed Leadership Incubator. These issues will take time. It will be the leaders that are in place in 10, 20, 30 years that will be bringing these efforts to fruition. This is an effort to help identify those folks and arm them with the skills, information, and relationships necessary in order to help get the things done that will lead to a better water future for the region. The third is the data piece. We're not going to be building a framework. We're not going to be building some massive magical database that will contain all information. That's something of a fool's errand. But we will be assisting a lot of the very good work that's happening in the region and helping connect people who are doing that work in order to lever up the efforts and develop much better collection, monitoring, and communication, not only so that it can inform policy, but so that it can inform the larger public narrative around quality, quantity, and public health. And the fourth piece is really about technical assistance for small communities and their utilities. They are often left out of these conversations. There are a lot of small communities up and down the main stem and TRIBs in the region with aging infrastructure, with compounding problems, who are going to need assistance, who can't really be left behind because those systems are very important to the larger health of these watersheds. To kick off the process, in December, I believe, we held an initial workshop in Pittsburgh, trying to bring together as many different types of stakeholders from across the region as we could. It was Allegheny County centric, something we are working to expand beyond. But we brought together the people who were very helpful in developing the phase 1 report and asked a series of questions. The first question is, and this is feedback. These next several slides are feedback we got from stakeholders in the region. This is not the water center's ideas. These are the ideas of the region. What is most needed to strengthen existing regional efforts to protect and improve water quality and address water quantity? First point, enhance coordination around resources, ideas, and work plans. Working together, doing more with less. Unified vision, the idea that we need a common goal. And coordination across different stakeholder groups. People are very siloed. You've got the watershed people, you've got the recreation people, you've got the utility people. You know, they work together sometimes, but you know, those barriers can be brought down, and you know, working together across those silos can be very powerful and strong. The next piece, next 2 points really are very important. That idea of the nexus between land use, land planning, and water quality, particularly as regarding stormwater, that idea that permitting requirements and engagement with the municipalities, given that you know they generally control land management within their borders, is a very key issue. It needs to be done carefully. You don't want to stifle economic activity, but if done smartly, you can have both very smart growth and good water quality. Comprehensive data. People always want more data. No scientist will tell you there's not enough data. And enforcement of existing laws. Second point, pardon me, how could additional collaboration and networking play a role? What would you want to see out of a network like this? You know, coordination and networking is key. There's a lot of wheel spinning. There's a sense that the funding is something of a zero-sum game. So people see themselves, you know, they might be on good terms, but in something of a competition for the scarce resources that are out there. So finding how to do more with less, avoiding duplication, fragmentation, competition, leveraging each other's efforts, and attracting more external funding. That's a key point. If federal agencies, if state agencies see that there is a vision, see that there is coordination, they know that the funding will be well spent, and you'll find that it attracts more outside funding to these issues. We noted that there were reference to the Army Corps of Engineers, not surprisingly, given that they control the flow within the main stems and several key TRIBs, but no mention of EPA in the initial workshop, which was telling, because in the western part of the state and in the Pittsburgh region in particular, they're seen essentially as an enforcement entity. They can be much more than that, providing technical assistance and in many cases funding and coordination for these efforts, but there needs to be a plan. Some folks in the room want to see efforts to develop regulations with sharper teeth, and everybody wants more consistent and reinforced public engagement and messaging coming from water resource organizations. Political will to do a lot of these difficult activities, this is going to take money and effort long term, arises out of a consistent public narrative so that people understand these issues. It's about public education. It's about education of elected officials and appointed officials. And that idea of consistent messaging is key. This is what we heard from the group as far as desired network outcomes. The graphics are some of the things that we undertook exercises in the workshops to get everybody on understanding each other's issues and helping to clarify their own and their own ideas. Better connecting regional actors, working, as I mentioned, with less duplication, more efficiency. More can be done if people know and trust each other, and they know what each other are up to and can learn from one another. That second point there is key, building trust and social capital. That's hard to do. It takes time. People need to know and trust each other. You all don't need to like each other, but you need to trust each other and know who you can call to get things done and know where each other stand. You're not always going to agree on everything, but you need to at least be able to pick up the phone and interact when necessary in order to move the ball forward. Sometimes you go sideways, sometimes you go forward, as long as you're not going backwards. And once these key connections and trust and social capital are established, then the network can move more towards action. How do you get things done? How do you bring more funding in? But you've got to trust each other, and you've got to cast as wide a net and build as broad a base as possible in order to make that powerful. And again, stakeholders are looking for committed regional leadership around specific shared priorities. More desired network outcomes. Geography is important. Obviously, these are enormous watersheds encompassing multiple states. How big is unwieldy and how small is too small? More or less, you tend to settle on the 10-county Southwest PA region, the SPC boundaries, if you will. But we need to be a bit porous and opportunistic. These watersheds don't respect political boundaries. And if there are stakeholders who want to be involved outside, absolutely. They're welcome to be part of the conversation. The process really needs to be across the region, not just engaging Allegheny County, and also not just involving the typical groups who come to water meetings, if you will. We need to find ways to get people into the conversation who aren't typically in the conversation. That's what helps generate the political will at the higher levels when elected officials and political leaders see that there is a broad base of support for some of these issues. Also, it's important to recall, and we're going to keep reminding people that this is a long game, and this effort will be multi-year. This is not a linear process. There'll be 2 steps forward, 1 step back. There'll be experimentation. There will be a bit of exploration, but every step of this process is progress. This is not about building an organization that's hierarchical and imposing a will. This is about strengthening the relationships in the community across historic, economic, political, social divisions in many cases. That's going to take time, and people are going to need to be patient. But every conversation that happens in this process is going to be progress. Next steps, we're right now engaged in a series of further stakeholder engagement. We're trying to get into the region more deeply. Unfortunately, we couldn't do it in person, but we will as soon as we can. We want to make sure that we're being very transparent. Again, this is not about the water center at Penn. This is not about Hines imposing a vision on the region. This is about enabling the region to come together about building a vision that is uniquely about Southwest PA, uniquely about these watersheds. We'll be getting more detailed work into steps 2, 3, and 4, the leadership development, the data piece, the small utility piece over the coming months, COVID issues notwithstanding. Our role in this process as the water center will be to facilitate. We're not predetermining the outcomes, and we're not acting as a gatekeeper. People who want to be involved need to be involved, even if it's people who aren't typically involved in these conversations. In fact, that's actively encouraged. We need to cast as wide a net as possible and encourage deep, often difficult conversations to happen in order to build that trust and that social capital that's going to be necessary in order to build the political will to move the ball forward over the next 20 or 30 years. Again, this is a long game. Some ideas on that concept of organization versus network. Again, this is a network we're building, not an organization. Organizations are controlled and planned. Networks are loosely controlled and emergent. That can be frustrating at times, but it also keeps you much more flexible. The strength of organizations are expertise and effort, Whereas in a network, it's connections and trust. Really work on getting to know different people across the region and really find ways you can work together. We do programs and services in an organization. Pardon me. In a network, we do experiments and platforms. Decisions are made by bosses in an organization, whereas they're made by people close to the work. It's more of a ground up approach in a network. And this effort, I should have mentioned earlier, is very much about ground up. The people closest to the ground should be the most actively involved. And it's a chance for people higher up in political, technical, educational, et cetera, organizations to listen to the people close to the ground. And information in an organization is proprietary, whereas in a network, it's open and shared. This is about leveraging what people in the network know so that it can be shared across geographies, across issues, and across boundaries. This is going to take some effort. People love change. Everybody wants to see transformational change, but it's hard. People love change as long as nothing looks different. Keep that in mind. It's going to take some work, folks, but it's important not to rush directly into trying to identify priorities and actions. We will be moving in that direction, but first we've got to figure out what you all want this network to look like and how we can build it so that it's effective for the long term. And again, bringing us back to the key question and wrapping this up, and something to think about, and something we want your input on. We really want to hear from you as to how you see these questions, or this question being answered, and what you see a network like this doing for you and for the region. How do we adapt water policy, systems, and practices? What's our policy? What do the systems look like? And what do we actually do so that we protect public health and the environment while balancing that with innovation, with economic growth, with resilience? That's economic resilience, climate resilience, et cetera. Sustainability, it's got to be sustainable for the long term. Equity, it's got to be fair and it's got to be just. People need to have a seat at the table, and everybody's voice needs to be heard. With that, again, we encourage your feedback. Very interested in hearing from you as to how we can help make this process happen. And with that, I thank you for your time and look forward to meeting you all in person just as soon as we can. Thanks very much.